Everybody got to go. And it's, children believe that they're invincible, that they're never going to die. But by the time you get older, you should know that one day I got to go. I got to go. Everybody has got to go. Right? And so when you know this, you should try to get stuff in order for that day. But one thing we also have to get in order is our soul, our relationship with God. He tells him to be strong. To be strong. And mind you, he's not talking about the kind of strength that is, I lift weights, or I'm just a strong man. I can take on the world. He's talking about the kind of strength that only comes from connection to God. And that's the kind of strength that Solomon was going to need. You can only get that kind of strength from connection to God. He says to be courageous. And to have a true courage, you must be connected to God. You must be. So he's telling them be strong, be courageous, but he's really telling them to be in fellowship and connection to God. If you are truly in fellowship and connection with God, you are strong and you are courageous, because you know you have nothing to fear except for your God self. Then he says, and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his hands and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his ordinances, his testimonies. Listen, I don't blame David for telling this to his son, because he wants to make sure that he has a relationship with God. Now, for those of us in the new covenant, for those of us who have been washed and cleaned by the blood of the Lamb, I can't imagine the feeling of having to depart, and there's people who I know that I love that I haven't done my best to teach them about God, to bring them closer to God, to make sure they have a strong relationship with God. So I understand why he says this. He says, these are kingly men. He could have said, make sure that the throne stays strong, keep the military mighty, do this and do that, keep the money in the reserves, do this, do that. No. He says, stay close to God. Because you know what? David was a man who made a lot of mistakes. He hurt people. He hurt Bathsheba. He got Bathsheba's husband killed. When his daughter was violated in the worst way by her brother, he didn't do anything about it. David did some rough stuff. And David knows what it's like not to be strong and not to be courageous. Because see, it's strength that makes you say, yeah, I see Bathsheba. Bathsheba has something that is luring me. But it's strength that makes you say, I'm not going to call her up here. That's strength. And that's the strength that comes being connected to God. It's so interesting to me when people fall away from the church and oftentimes find themselves in the worst predicaments that they have ever been in their life. It's not a coincidence. Because when we fall away from the community of God, we also fall away from God. And then when we fall away from God, we are easily lured. And when we're easily lured, we find ourselves being close to death. And so David knew what it was like to make grave mistakes, serious mistakes, because he wasn't strong, because he wasn't courageous, and because he wasn't staying close to God. So David gives his son the best advice, the soon-to-be king. He gives him the best advice, and he says, you make sure that you stay strong and courageous to avoid the lures and the temptations and stay connected to God. That's what I want you to know, my son. That's what I need you to understand.